In this video, we're going to cover database backup and recovery in MongoDB. Now, in SQL, at least for MySQL, we were able to do SQL dumps as a form of a backup. And when you take a backup, it is always database-wide, meaning it's everything in the database, users, indexes, views, any structures, any stored procedures, functions, everything gets backed up. In Mongo, it's the same way. When you do an export, you're exporting all the users, all the data, all the collections, any stored procedures, any indexes you created, everything gets exported. So we're going to go ahead and open up two windows, and I'm going to SSH into my server with both of them. And one of them I'm going to start up with Mongo. And remember, I told you if we start with Mongo again and do show DBS, we're going to get no permissions. So I need to connect, but not with Mongo. I need to connect to the admin database with ADB root. It's probably the last video where I'm going to stress that. But for security purposes, now that security is turned on, we always need to connect with ADB root. And then I'm going to say, let's use let's show what databases there are first, DBS. And I'm going to say, let's use ADB clone. This is the clone we created in the last video. So if I do a show collections, we see that there is a few collections in there, like the system.js, the user, the location. Okay, so how do we perform a backup? Well, obviously you could copy your database, which is what we did in a previous video. But this is, we're actually going to back it up and get it out of the database and back up everything to disk. Now when you do a backup, it's actually done through command line. It is not done through Mongo terminal. So anytime you see this, the greater than sign, if you type Mongo dump, which is the command we're going to use to create the backup, it will not work. It's going to throw an error. You need to be at the OS terminal here. And I'm going to go ahead and do pwd so we know where we are. And let's do an ls. So I can see here I have an export. I have a few directories here. So what I'm going to do is let's make a backup directory. I'll call it backup. There's our backup. And now to do an export, I'm going to say Mongo dump. At least they kept that. Let me spell it right. And at least they kept that consistent with SQL dump. -u, so we're going to say ADB root. You have to put the password in. And we need to tell it what database I want to back up. So I'm going to back up the ADB clone database. And -o is the output. So I'm going to say put it in the backup directory. And we have authentication failed. Let's see if I typed it. ADB root. Well, up here when I connected, I said ADB root. Password is ADB. Let's try that one more time. Oh. Actually, let's do this. Let's back up the ADB database. And that worked. Probably going to say, well, why didn't the other one work? Well, we got authentication failed. Well, let's take a look. If I do show DBS and I go into ADB, use ADB, and then I say show users, there is ADB root. So that's why when I logged in, it authenticated against the ADB database and said there's a user, he's able to do a backup. Let's watch this. Now if I do use ADB clone, and now I do show users, there's no users in here. So that's why the authentication failed. So I wanted to do that as an example to just re-stress security that when you log in to do your backup, you need to have permissions on that database. So for now, we're going to do a backup of the ADB database. And let's do an ls again. Oh, nope, want to do it down here. And let's cd to the backup directory. And we'll see that there is an ADB directory now. And The way Mongo takes a backup is there's 2 files, minimum 2 files, per collection. And this has all of the data in it. So I'm going to go ahead and actually restore the database. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and use, actually let's use ADB. And now I'm going to go ahead and let's say db.drop database. You don't have to do this portion. I just want to go ahead and have you follow along to do a restore. So it says it dropped. If I say show DBS, there is no ADB database. Oh, that's heartbreaking. So let's go ahead and do a restore now. If Mongo dump is what we used to do a backup, Mongo restore is what we're going to use to do a restore. So I'm going to say Mongo restore, and I need to do the same username and password and database name. So we're going to say -u is ADB root, -p is ADB. The database I want to restore is ADB. And now here's a new one. Since the ADB database no longer exists here, I can't use it to authenticate me. I can't go ahead and log in with ADB root to ADB because there is no ADB to log into. So what we need to do is we need to say authentication database. So it's authentication database admin, because remember, ADB root is a user in the admin database, and the file is always the last thing. I'm going to say it's in backup/ADB. Let's make that a slash. Everything looks right. Mongo restore. Let's see, no command found. Well, let's see what we got here. Oh, isn't it funny? It's lowercase. I should have known. Everything is very case sensitive. Okay, and I spelled AUTHEN, authentication database. Okay, let me do PWD. And I'm already in the directory, so what I need to do is say cd space .. And the reason is, when I pass this in, it's trying to go to the backup ADB directory. I was already in ADB. So now we're in the root directory, meaning we're in the base, and there we go. Once we got everything right, it runs pretty quickly. Let's test it. Let's do a show DBS. There's the ADB database. Let's use ADB, and let's do show collections. And there are all of the collections that were there. Let's also do a show users. And there are the users that were restored. So that is how you would go ahead and back up your database. Now normally what I would do is in the backup directory, there's that ADB folder. I would zip it, put a date on it, and put it someplace else for safekeeping. You can always rename it and then change it later on. But that's how you perform a backup and a recovery.